Okay, and I'm excited about what we're going to do. We're kind of diving into the problematic world of eschatology, and we're going to work through the eschatological discourse together. So I'm going to show you how I've worked through it. The same thing, we're just going to read the text. We're going to look at the cross references, and then we're going to try to ask good questions. And I think when we do that, we'll spend a couple of times on the eschatological discourse and then a couple of times on Revelation. And then eventually we'll get to Carlos's text in 1 Thessalonians, which I do think is one of the hardest things to understand in eschatology. And we'll see where it takes us. I did want to do an advertisement. Mary Hannah Swartzen pointed out that the American Enterprise Institute is doing a dinner on March 11th, and it's all about skills necessary in the workforce. And so she asked if I would invite you to that dinner. It's a free dinner, and I want to encourage you to go. So if you go, I'll give you 10 points extra credit on your final grade if you just tell me you went. So it should be a good evening together and well worth your time, I think. So last night I achieved one of my lifetime goals. I was able to upload myself into Logos. And so I wanted to do a video about Logos. And you can see that I've got Logos in the background. Oh, that shouldn't make me as happy as it makes me. To become one with the Logos. Oh my goodness. So we're going to look at the Eschatological Discourse. And if you want this document, I think I uploaded it a couple places in Brightspace. And I've changed it a little since I uploaded it, so if it looks slightly different. But basically what this document is a document I did years ago where I went through the Eschatological Discourse in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and I just put the texts that were similar beside each other. Anywhere John touches on anything in the Eschatological Discourse, I've put that as well, and then I tried to put what Paul had to say. And so what we're going to go through is we're just going to look at this, and we're asking the question, is the Eschatological Discourse primarily talking about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, or is it primarily talking about the end of the world? I've come down on the side that I think it's talking about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. I think the vast majority of it is about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. But there are a couple of places that give me pause in holding that view. So I just want to be up front with you. I've kind of told you my eschatology is post-millennial. That really isn't what a lot of people are these days. To be a postmillennialist, you typically end up being what's called a partial preterist. That is, you take the eschatological discourse mainly about the destruction of the temple. So I just want to be up front with that. But I also want to walk you through why I've come to that position. And I want you to be the jury. I want you to decide if there's an element of truth to it, or if, man, that's just not the way you should look at these texts. So that's what we're going to do today. And when we start out, the event that happens right before the Eschatological Discourse, this is the description in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So in Matthew, Jesus approaches Jerusalem and says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." If I were doing this on my own, I would add a verse right now. That's probably quoting the passage in Deuteronomy where it talks about Yahweh gathering his children like chicks. Jesus says, "See, your house is left to you desolate." That desolate word is going to visit us again when it starts talking about the abomination of desolation. And then Jesus says, "For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" So before all this starts out, Jesus is telling Jerusalem, if you had realized what was going on, you would not respond this way. Mark is a little clearer. It says he sat down opposite the treasury. The treasury was in the court of the women. If you've ever seen a model of the temple in Jesus' time, you know, you had that outer court. Any Jewish person could go there. You had a wall about 3 feet high that said on it, if you a Jewish person and you step beyond this border, then you're responsible for your own death. And we've actually got that inscription, like it's been preserved so we can read it. That's probably what Paul means when he talks about the wall of separation being torn down. So then you go into the area of the temple proper, you go up certain steps, you go into the court of the women, and I believe in the court of the women, if you look to the right, you're looking into the temple proper. The room to the right is this treasury. And so Mark says he sat down opposite the treasury and watched people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put large sums, and a poor widow came and put 2 copper coins. It's about $5 what she puts in, which is not a lot of money, but if you're abjectly poor, $5 is a fortune, a seeming fortune. And he calls his disciples to him and said to them, "Truly, I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those contributing to the offering box. For they contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on." And then Luke kind of sets it up this way. Jesus looked and saw the rich putting gifts in the offering box, and he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly, I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty put in all she had to live on." So that's kind of how we're to think of this discourse starting out. They were there in this court of the women. Jesus pronounced the woe about Jerusalem and then praised this widow. And then all 3 texts agree that the next thing that happened was, as they were leaving, the disciples noticed how beautiful the building was. And so Matthew says this: Jesus left the temple and was going away, and his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone on another that will not be thrown down. So Jesus has just praised the woman for what looks like an insignificant act, and he's saying that's more important than what all the wealthy people did. As they're leaving, the disciples are overwhelmed with kind of the beauty of the building. And that building was very beautiful. There were some stones in that building that were 26 feet long. And imagine quarrying a stone with an axe and getting a perfect stone 26 feet long. That's incredible work. And so this is like the most beautiful building that the disciples had ever seen. And Jesus says, there isn't going to be one of these stones left on another. When we get to Mark, he says nearly the same thing. As they came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone on another that will not be thrown down." And then Luke's version, and while some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone on another that will not be torn down." So I want to just point out there that Jesus hasn't said one word about the end of the world. What he said is the temple is going to be torn down. They're overwhelmed with this beauty, and Jesus is saying this temple is going to be torn down. He hasn't said one word about the end of the world at this point. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming, your parousia, and of the soontileia of the age, the end of the age." Now, in Matthew, it's very easy to interpret that the disciples are asking when the world is going to end. It's absolutely easy to come to that conclusion. I'm not sure that's the right conclusion that we should come to, but it's very easy if all you had was Matthew to come to the conclusion that the Eschatological Discourse is about the end of the world. What we should maybe think about, and I don't think I have my Sharpie with me. The Mount of Olives is about a mile away from the temple. If you've ever seen that picture of the Dome of the Rock, the Muslim holy place, that's taken from the Mount of Olives. So the Mount of Olives is here, and then you have the Kidron Valley, and then you have the Temple Mount. And it's a huge valley that you walk down and walk up. So when they're on the Mount of Olives, you can look right in. You can look into the door of the temple. So they've walked about a mile, and they're sitting down, and this is what Mark says. As he sat down on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished? And while I'm going to readily admit it's easy to read Matthew as talking about the end of the world, would you grant that there's nothing in Mark that's talking about the end of the world? Jesus said the temple is going to be destroyed, and the disciples say, when is the temple going to be destroyed? Now, what's strange about this is that when Mark says, when will all these things happen? Those of you who've had Greek, can you see that this is the word suntileia? What will be the co-ending or something of it? Well, that word in Mark, in Greek, is the same word in Matthew, the end of the age. So it's at least possible that we may be overreading Matthew once you start comparing that with Mark. Maybe we're not overreading it, maybe it is the end of the world, but it at least raises the issue, because when you read Mark, it doesn't look like they're talking about the end of the world at all. It looks like they're just talking about the end of the temple. Luke is even more on Mark's side. They ask him, "Teacher, when will these things be, and what will be the sign that these things are to take place?" In both Mark and Luke, there's nothing, at least initially, about the end of the world. It's only talking about the end of the temple. Do you see why this is an issue? So we're trying to figure out, is the eschatological discourse telling me what the end of the world is going to look like, or is it telling me what the end of the temple is going to look like? And if all I had was Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I would say Matthew and Luke clearly are saying the end of the temple. Matthew may be saying the end of the temple, but it looks more like he's talking about the end of the world. But it's weird. So whenever you come to a difficult passage in Scripture, what do? You go to the text. The Bible is the best commentary on the Bible. You start looking for what's being said in the text and see, does that help us one way or another? So before we go on, any questions or comments? You kind of understand what we're doing. You've got the document, so you can go through it yourself. All three have this statement, "Don't be led astray." Jesus answered them, "See to it that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray." Mark's version. Jesus began to say, "See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and they will lead astray many." Luke, he said, "See to it that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and the time is at hand. Do not go after them." Now, is there anything in that text that would favor Jesus speaking about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD? There is a point that's often not pointed out, but who's Jesus talking to here? Is he talking to us directly? Or is he talking to his disciples? He's talking to his disciples. He's telling his disciples there's a great danger that you could follow a false teacher, because people are going to come and say, something about this event. And remember, in Mark and Luke, the only thing he's referenced is the destruction of the beautiful temple. He says, watch out. When you, this is Matthew, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, see to it that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. And that's Matthew 24:6. And notice that this is that same word, syntelea, and so telos. So this could be the end of the world. It is that word. The end is not yet. For nations will rise against nations, kingdom against kingdoms. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of the birth pangs. Mark, when you hear of war, and remember in Mark, there is no reference to the end of the world. It's just the end of the temple in terms of what's being explicitly said. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This will take place, for the end is not yet. So this is Mark 13:7. And notice that's our same word. So, like, have we switched to the end of the world, or is he talking about the telos being the end of the temple? And I think it's kind of up in the air right now what he's talking about. For nations will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of the birth pangs. Notice this is directed to them. When you hear, when you disciples hear. Luke, when you hear of wars, tumults, do not be terrified, for these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. So far, we're exactly where we were when we started. Is it the end of the world? Is it the end of the temple? They're using similar words. Is there evidence one way or another? Matthew, then they will deliver you up to tribulation. So that's going to be Matthew 24:9. And this word tribulation, this is where we get the word great tribulation. So those who take a futurist approach, so I'm leaning toward partial preterism, those who take a futurist report say this is talking about the great tribulation. So that Matthew is the deciding issue because it uses this word tribulation. I might point out, though, that the text says they will deliver you up to tribulation. It doesn't say they will deliver the people who are alive at that time up. He's looking at Peter and says they will deliver you to tribulation. You will be hated by all nations for my sake. Then many will fall away and betray one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. Because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, so this is 13. Notice that's our telos word again, the one who endures to the telos will be saved. And then we come to verse 14, which for most people says this is clear proof that it can't be 70 AD. Because Jesus says in Matthew, and this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And when we look at that, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole oikumene, in the whole inhabited world, for a testimony to all the Gentiles, and then the telos will come. So if we read Matthew, it's pretty easy to say, okay, that's talking about the end of the world. The problem is, the massive problem is that Paul in Colossians 1:6, well, let's read it. Don't take my word for it. And how I found these things, they're just the cross references listed in your Bible, right? So 1:5 says, because of the hope laid up for you in heaven, of this you have heard in the word of the gospel of truth, so the evangelion, same word in Matthew, which has come to you just as it is in panti to cosmo, just as it has in the entire cosmos, and is bearing fruit and growing up just as it is in you. Colossians 1:6 says the gospel has gone out to the whole world. Do you see that? So if someone says, okay, well, this says the gospel has to go out to the whole world, Paul thought it had gone out to the whole world when he wrote Colossians. He uses the word cosmos. Matthew uses the word oikumene, the places where people live. So I don't know. Which way do you go there? Mark says it this way, be on your guard, for they will deliver you. So he's talking to the disciples over to councils. You will be beaten in synagogues. You will stand before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness before them. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all the nations. And when they bring you to trial and deliver you up, do not be anxious beforehand what you are to say, but whatever you have been given you in that hour, say that. For it's not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. And brother will deliver brother over to death, and father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the telos will be saved. And I've got a footnote there, and you can see that's the same word in Matthew. Luke says it this way, but before all this, they will lay hands on you, they will persecute you, delivering you up to synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be your opportunity to witness. Settle therefore in your minds, do not meditate beforehand how to answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which your adversaries will not be able to withstand or contradict. You will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends. And some of you they will put to death, and you will be hated by all people for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives. So it's not just Colossians 1:6 that says the gospel has gone out to all nations. 1:23 says the gospel you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven. So if we want to, what did we say that was 1:13? No, it must be one. Do I have that? 1:23. He is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death in order to present you holy and blameless above reproach before him, if indeed you continue in faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you have heard, which has been proclaimed. So it's the gospel having been proclaimed in all creation, in all katisis that's under heaven. Paul says that the gospel has been proclaimed under all katisis. So I'm a little confused at this point. Is Paul exaggerating there? Or is he understanding what has happened in the Christian mission is fulfilling what Jesus said was a necessary condition for the end to come? That's a problem for me. And what do you do when you have a problem? You keep reading. You keep looking up the cross references. And so I'm putting down any parallel text I can find. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and tongue. I think all of these texts are picking up Genesis 12:3. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Matthew 28:19. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son. Psalm 2, ask of me and I will make the nations your inheritance, the very ends of the earth your possession. Psalm 22:27, all the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. I guess we've already got that, so I can delete it. Isaiah 2:2, it will come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the highest of mountains and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations will flow to it. And then at the end of Luke, Jesus says that repentance for forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all nations. So how am I to understand Matthew and Mark? Is it in the sense Paul's taking it, or is it in the sense more than that? And I have to admit, I'm a little confused here because it seems like there's some evidence for each of those views. And this is where it gets interesting. So, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, and then there's a parenthetical statement, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. When you see the abomination, desolation, get out. Same thing in Mark. When you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And well, let's do this footnote first before we do Luke. So I got a footnote there, and it's in your document, and it's a footnote about what in church history was called the Christian flight to Pella. How many of you have ever heard about the Christian flight to Pella? Me neither, until like years. I've been out of my PhD studies for years before I ever heard Christian flight to Pella. And it was when I was reading Eusebius. Eusebius was a early Christian historian, and he's really cool. You should read. It's only 300 pages. He kind of outlines the early church history. He wrote in 325 AD. He was Bishop of Caesarea. He's a great guy. He writes about everything. He's the one who has the quote that Papias said that Matthew wrote in Hebrew. All of it is going back to Eusebius. He is a major interpreter of the Bible. And in his church history, chapter 3, section 5, sentence 3, this is what Eusebius says. The people of the church in Jerusalem were commanded by an oracle given by revelation before the war to those in the city who were worthy of it to depart and dwell in one of the cities of Perea, which is called Pella. It is to those who believed on Christ, traveled from Jerusalem, so that when holy men had all together deserted the royal capital of the Jews, the whole land of Judea was destroyed. He's saying that the church in Jerusalem got a prophecy that told them to get out. And if we went and read the whole thing, we would see that what happened is that during the Roman revolt in 66 AD, that Rome besieged Jerusalem. And during that siege, Christians were caught. And the way those sieges work is everything's great until you run out of food, and then people start killing each other. They start being cannibals. Once you run out of food, if you're locked up and people see that you're healthy, then they'll beat you until you tell them where you've hidden your food. And Josephus, when he describes the siege, he talks about this army of men who decided that they were women, and so they grew their hair out long and they dressed like women, but they were really men. And Josephus talks about, you would see them coming down the way and you would think, oh, that's a pretty woman. And then they would get right on you and you'd realize that it was a vile man and they would attack you. Josephus talks about all of that happening in the siege. And that was going to happen to the Christians. They were going to starve to death. Rome besieged and there was no way to get out. But as they were besieging the city, a rumor went out that Egypt was attacking. And when the Roman general Vespasian and his son Titus heard it, they broke the siege and they went to attack Egypt. Well, it was just a rumor. But what happened is when that siege was broken, every Christian in Jerusalem fled to Pella, which is across the Jordan River in the mountains of Jordan. If you know a map of Galilee, you know, with the Dead Sea, the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee, Pella is here. So they basically cross the border, cross the Jordan River, and go live in a pagan city called Pella. And it's called a Christian flight to Pella. Epiphanius records it. This heresy of the Nazarenes exists in Berea in the neighborhood of Silo, Syria, and the Decapolis, that's where Pella is, in the region of Pella, in Basanitis, in the so-called Kokva in Hebrew. From there, it took its beginning after Exodus from Jerusalem, when all the disciples went to live in Pella because Christ had told them to leave Jerusalem and to go away since it would undergo a siege. Because of this advice, they lived in Pella after having moved to that place, as I said. Now, do you see why that argument may be important? When you see the abomination of desolation standing, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Do you see how easy it would be to connect the Christian flight to Pella with this verse? The Christian flight to Pella happened in 66 AD. And it was the reason why no Christians died in the siege. They read something and they got out. That's starting to lead very heavily to me to the idea that this is talking about the destruction of the temple. Now, we've read Matthew and Mark. Look at what Luke says. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. See, that's not in Matthew or Mark. It's in Luke. So if you're a Christian in Jerusalem and you see Jerusalem besieged, and you've been reading Luke or Mark or Matthew, and it says, get out. Don't go back to get your clothes. Don't go back to get out. Can you see how easy that is to connect with the Christian flight to Pella? It seems to me that that's what those passages are talking about. Daniel 8:13, then I heard the Holy One speaking all together. He said, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot? The Greek translation of a similar passage says, O Lord, heed me, open your eyes and see the desolation of us and of your city where your name has been called upon it. For we do not make request in our prayers before you on the ground of our righteousness, but because of your mercy. Daniel's prayer is about the temple. If this is talking about the destruction of the temple, then the abomination of desolations makes sense to me. The temple is going to be destroyed. I know from reading Josephus that the temple is on the highest part of the mountain on which Jerusalem was built. I know that they used the temple as the final fortress. So they kicked the doors open and they built it as a castle. Could that be the abomination of desolation that they're talking about? Let's read the full thing. So Matthew says, let the one who is in the housetop not go down to take what's in his house. Let the one who is in the field not turn back. So he's saying, when you see and when you have the opportunity, you get out. You get out that moment. Alas, for women who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants in those days. I think the idea is because you can't run real fast when you're pregnant or nursing children. Pray that your flight may not be in winter. Pray that it not be on a Sabbath. Now, I've been honest. I'm partial preterist. I think this is about the destruction, or at least most of it's about the destruction. But I'm not completely convinced I'm right. So I pray all the time, Lord, help my flight not be in winter. I have no idea what that means. Jesus told me to pray it, so I'm going to pray it. Help my flight not be in winter. If this is talking about the Christian flight to Pella, there's a reason why you don't want to flee in winter. And the reason is the Jordan River is in flood stage in winter. I had an occasion with Scott Jones to go to the Holy Land in winter, and we went to the Jordan River, the source waters of the Jordan River, and I had been there before, like 20 years before, and I had remembered just this beautiful stream there, and at the source waters of the Jordan River, you can walk on a sidewalk, and it's just a lovely walk into a meadow, and the Jordan River just springs up out of the ground. It's the weirdest thing you've ever seen. It's like 500 water spigots just turned on, and it just gushes up out of the ground, turns into a river. Well, when Scott and I went in winter, when we had a group, I walked by that same stream, and that water was moving like 50 miles an hour, and it was over my head. The water was flowing so fast that my feet were on the ground, but the water was just rushing by. I mean, the ground was shaking because in winter, the rainy season happens and the Jordan River will get into flood stage. If you stepped in that little creek, man, your body would be 20 miles down before you knew anything. And so Jesus is saying, pray that it not be in winter because you're going to have to cross the Jordan River and you don't want it to be in flood stage. Pray that it not be on a Sabbath because you're only supposed to go like half a mile on a Sabbath. You need to get out. For then there will be great tribulation. So if you're a futurist, you're still saying this is talking about the end of the world, and so it's the great tribulation. Such has not been from the beginning of the world until now, and will never be again. Now, if you're a partial preterist and you think this is about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, do partial preterists believe there's going to be a great tribulation at the end of the world? And the answer is no. Those who embrace partial preterism believe that this great tribulation was talking about the 3.5 years that led up to the destruction of the temple. And people who are futurists will say, well, how can you say what happened to the Jewish people then was worse than the Holocaust? I mean, 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. And that's true. But they weren't eating themselves in the Holocaust. They were eating each other at the last. They were eating their children, as it says in Deuteronomy. Even Titus, when he was watching what was happening, he raised his hand, and Josephus, who by that time was with Titus, Titus said, I'm not doing this, God is doing this. If those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect, it was cut short. Then everyone who says, look, here's the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it, for false Christ and false prophets will come and arise, perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you beforehand, so if they say, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines even to the west, so will be the parousia of the Son of Man. Where the corpse is, the vultures gather. Okay, that's a really interesting verse to me. And here's why it's interesting. Where the corpse is, the vultures will gather. How does the Vulgate translate that? Douay-Rheims of Apocrypha is the Christian, the English translation of the Vulgate. How do they translate it? Wherever the body is, the eagles gather. Well, which one is right in Greek? In Greek, it can be either one. It's the word aiatoi. Vultures nearly always surround dead bodies. And so vultures, a great option. What would be true if we translated eagles? Where the dead corpse is, there the eagles gather. Do you know anything about the Roman legions? Do you know they carried a flag? They call it a standard, right? You've maybe seen the SQPD or whatever it is, the Senate and the people of Rome, whatever that stands for. Do you know what's on the top of those flags? Eagles. I mean, if we did a lemma search on all the Bible, this is what we would find. See, I've borne you on eagle's wings. I mean, just start going through these. Eagle, could be vulture there. Well, let's see there. Yeah, it's a different word. It's being translated eagle there. Ravens, vultures there. Eagle. You can see how that's a pretty important decision. My computer is going to die any second, so when it does, we'll pick up there next time. But look at what Mark says. When you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not, let the reader understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is in the housetop not go down, nor enter his house to take anything out. Let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant, those who are nursing infants in those days. You all pray. He's talking to his disciples, that it not happen in winter. For in those days there will be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of creation that God created until now, and will never be. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he has shortened the days. And if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, look, there he is, do not believe it. For false Christ and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. Be on your guard. I've told you all things beforehand. Luke is the shortest. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, that's going to make me favor the eagles in the others. Know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart. And let not those who are out in the country enter it. For these are the days of vengeance, to fulfill what is written. Alas for women who are pregnant and those nursing infants in those days, for there will be a great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword, be led captive among all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That section makes me lean toward destruction of the temple. When we look at the parallel text, days of vengeance and desolation, that's always when people have sinned against God, not followed his law, desolation. That's a very Jewish thing. And then I think we'll end with this one today. Immediately after the tribulations of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heaven will be shaken.